last.
I can do that. But first, I actually want to say this might be our very last episode. Have you seen that the rapture is going to happen tomorrow?
Oh,
It's
I've been
all
hearing about
all over the
that.
internet, social media. I mean, not that we're going to be raptured, but like all the infrastructure will go down because some Christians must be running these things, and we can't get on Zoom. We'll be screwed. So
Oh yeah, I don't know
this
what
might
we're
be the
gonna
last one.
do. I've been keeping up with a website. I think it's a joke, but I'm actually not sure where you can if you're religious and you're worried that you might be raptured and your pets could be left behind,
Yeah.
you can pay an atheist to
What an
to
entrepreneurial
take over
idea.
your pet care after
Wow.
you're gone in the rapture. So, there's maybe a business opportunity there for somebody.
Wow. Okay, so let me introduce our guest. Robert Bartholomew, as his Wikipedia entry tells us, is not the English cricketer with the same name who was born in the 19th century. Definitely not. Instead, our guest, Dr. Bartholomew, is a former journalist and a medical sociologist. He's an honorary senior lecturer at the Department of Psychological Medicine at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. He writes for several newspapers and journals on sociological and fringe science topics, including Psychology Today, Skeptical Inquirer, and the British magazines The Skeptic and Fortean Times. He is a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry and an internationally recognized expert on mass psychogenic illness, social delusions, and moral panics. He is the author of at least 19 books on diverse topics such as Havana Syndrome, UFOs, cryptids, extraordinary social behaviors, ghost claims, and the history of demonizing immigrants. Interestingly, Robert lived for a time with the indigenous people of both Malaysia and Australia. I heard that somewhere else. I did not see that in Wikipedia. But now lives in New Zealand, and if you don't detect a Kiwi accent, it's because he is not native to that country. Welcome, Mr. Bartholomew, Dr. Bartholomew. I am so happy you were able to make it this morning for you. What time is it there?
Okay, it is 12:23 here in New Zealand in the afternoon.
Okay, well that's better than when we get people on just the other side of the Atlantic. Then it's really, really bad time for them. So that's good. And it's not Monday, it's Tuesday for you.
It is Tuesday. I can give you some sports tips or
Yes,
stuff.
please.
Yeah.
I love it. Get information from the future when we have our international folks on these shows. I love it.
So how about if we look at the poll to get this started, just to get an idea of what we're talking about here? And by the way, I noticed we never get these perfect, and I noticed that number two, well, if it's hostile government action, it was claimed to be with ray guns, and we have that as two separate answers, so that's a little problematic. And nobody put my ray guns.
Nobody selected ray guns. I know,
Nobody.
we did have the answer choice, which is all of the above. So it could have been hostile
Mm.
government actions involving ray guns and
And
extraterrestrials, as well
aliens.
as mundane explanations. And we did have someone select that option. So I'm glad we put it in.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. What do we have? We also had our first question: are ghosts real? A very small number of people actually selected yes this time. Only
That's
only 3%.
shocking. That is shocking.
Yeah, that is. We've got 82% of people said no, and 15% not sure. Maybe haven't decided, haven't made up their mind. So, all right.
So in a
Um,
couple of weeks, or is it a month from now, we're going to have Kenny Biddle, who is going to be talking specifically about ghosts. So yeah,
oh,
be
I
sure to
can't
tune in for that.
wait. Kenny is a lot of fun. That'll be really interesting. I still laugh about his story that he tells about accidentally convincing people of ghosts. Okay. Well, let's go to that second question that Rob mentioned. What is behind Havana Syndrome? And we did have 9% of people selected hostile government action. Um, 24% of people selected some mundane explanation other than the ones that we had listed. Nobody picked just ray guns or extraterrestrials all by themselves. Like we said, one person did pick all of the above, and 6% of people selected something else besides the explanations we provided. I wonder if they were thinking about the insect noises that we've talked about before on this show that almost all of us could hear when Rob played the recording. And then 58%, a whopping majority of people, actually selected not sure on this one. So that is going to be great for this week's episode.
So you win the coffee bet, Kara, because yeah, I thought we were going to have the overwhelming majority go for number one. Yeah.
Yeah. We must have a lot of people either following the news or watching for trick questions in our opening polls.
Maybe that's it. They probably thought, well, if we're talking about this subject, it's probably because we don't think it's a hostile government action.
Yeah, I bet it might be that. We primed them a little bit. And then, but so we'll talk more about that here in just a little bit. And then our third question, it's always our fun question for the last one. Which of these X-Files stories is closest to a real phenomena? And we had a mixture of answers on this one, actually. 19% of people selected alien abduction, as well as the Jersey Devil and the Rain Man or Rain King. Or I should say 19% of people selected each of those options. They didn't select all three. And then 44% of people, so the largest amount of people, responded with Bigfoot on this one. Interesting. And I think I saw some remarks in the chat from people saying, depending on where you live, this may be a big part of your local mythology or lore. So
So this does not go with what I see on Facebook Reels and Instagram Reels and TikToks, because no one's talking about Bigfoot. Everyone's talking about the aliens are already here and abducting people, and people are star children and all that kind of stuff. I am kind of shocked that that did not get a higher number.
yeah, I am too, actually. I thought that would be a higher one as well. And maybe would this be a good time to ask Dr. Bartholomew to reveal the correct answer or the expected answer on this one?
Absolutely.
Sure. It's the Rain King or Rain Man.
And
So
you've
yeah,
got
so
a
tell us
story,
about that,
right?
because you mentioned it in the pre-show and I had not heard of this.
That's right. So a number of years ago, the TV show Weird or What with William Shatner contacted me and they said they couldn't find any skeptics for this case involving a man named Don Decker in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania in 1983. And the report was that he was in a house and he'd made it rain inside the house. Several police officers witnessed this. He was spending some time in jail for receiving stolen property. And when he went to the house, he was let off on furlough because his uncle had died and he was staying with his family. Well, anyway, he supposedly made it rain in the house. He went back to the jail, and everybody had heard about what had happened in the house. He supposedly made it rain in the jail as well. And they've interviewed the warden, who was a believer, prison guards who were believers, and several police officers who claimed to have witnessed it in the house. So it was a really interesting case with a lot of authorities who claimed to have seen this with their own eyes. And so we started to investigate that case, which has been billed by many people as one of the best evidences ever for paranormal phenomena. And the case fell apart. But the people involved were definitely not making it up.
So how was it raining inside the buildings? What was going on?
Well, I looked at everything. I looked at phase of the moon, you name it. And then it struck me. I got a hold of the weather records near Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania for 1983. And what I found was something really interesting. Just over a week before this happened, and there were no water pipes in the area where the rain was coming down. It was just, there was no logical explanation for it raining inside the house. The weather records for Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania revealed that about a week before, they had the largest snowfall in the history of any February, over 23 inches of snow. Then, in each successive day, it was above freezing, and then at night, it was below freezing, above, below, above, below. And with each passing day, the water would melt on the roof, and you got this area of trapped water surrounded by a thin layer of ice. And then just before the rain happened, they heard this cracking sound. And then the rain started to come down. First, the water came down on the side of the walls, and then from the ceiling, which is exactly what you would expect to get when I interviewed experts on ice dams, which is quite common in colder countries, especially when you get a change of seasons, like in the northeastern US when you go into February, March. That's maple syrup season, right? And the maple syrup sap runs when it is above freezing during the day and below freezing at night. And it's the ideal time for an ice dam. And it just so happened that Don Decker, who was there, was sitting on the couch when this happened, and he seemed to go in a trance-like state. What I found out later was, well, first of all, his uncle had just died. He was undergoing a lot of mental trauma. But I also found out that people who are cutters, who like to cut themselves, have a greater propensity to go into trance-like states, dissociative states. And he had actually cut himself while he was at the house. And so he had a history of cutting himself. And so there are logical explanations for this. And then the police officers who came to the house, because the guy didn't know what to do. He thought that this Don Decker sitting on the couch in a trance had made it rain inside the house. He calls the police. The police came and they instantly thought it was the devil because they were fundamentalist Christians. They were very deeply religious. The people inside the house were deeply religious, and the landlords, the husband and wife who owned the house, who came to look, they were deeply religious. So their first inclination was not, let's call a housing construction expert and have a closer look here. Their first assumption was, it's the devil. And Don Decker's been possessed by the devil and he's making it rain. And it was a series of unfortunate events.
Did they call an exorcist?
They didn't. But they did. Well, actually, they did. They called a priest to come in and try to exorcise Don Decker. And then when he went back to the prison, they actually, in the end, called an exorcist to exorcise Don Decker. This is the prison warden, and this is in 1983.
Did you
Okay.
say did you say 1983?
That's right. And curiously, when they interviewed the prison warden later, because I was doing the interview through a reporter who was in Strasbourg, in Pocono, that area, I said, ask him this question. How come that here's this guy who can supposedly make it rain inside the prison? This is one of the most remarkable events in human history. How come nobody took a photo of this or a video of it? And his response was, oh, there weren't a lot of cameras back then. Hello, I was alive in 1983, and there were a lot of cameras and even video cameras. You would think that even in the house when this happened, just imagine this guy is making it rain. He's gone into a trance. What do? You call the police. Okay. Wouldn't you call the TV people? Wouldn't you call other people to come there and take a recording of it or even take one photo? But they didn't. And what it reminds me of is the old saying, the older I get, the better I was, right? People remember things differently. And then as they're telling the story, it gets embellished years later. I think that's exactly what happened there.
Oh,
You
that's a
know,
common thing with everything. UFO tales, abduction tales, ghost tales, Bigfoot tales. Yeah.
yeah, that is
Yeah.
really wild to me. And I can actually see how that would have happened. I used to work in law enforcement and I actually did get called out a couple of times for what people believed to be supernatural occurrences. And Of
Oh,
course,
you
I didn't
exorcised a demon once, didn't you?
I did. I exorcised a demon from a home one time. I mean, I didn't believe that's what I was doing. It was a performance to get somebody to feel like they could go back in their house. Um, and but if I had believed it, and I probably wasn't supposed to do that. I think that was not the official policy for how to handle that kind of situation.
Do you think they
But
had a policy written up about that subject? Should you or should you not pretend to exercise demons if necessary?
they did not have a policy about that. They did have a policy about if you believed someone was having, like, a mental health episode and they were, maybe having some sort of a delusion or a hallucination or something, you were not to go along with it. So I guess that might have been the closest,
Mm, mm.
related policy. But no, I had other times where, people thought that they had a demon or that someone was possessed, and I had someone that thought I was the devil, and it was almost invariably kind of like you were describing. There was some sort of a health situation going on or a mental health crisis going on, and that was the explanation that people's minds first leapt to. But then, of course, there was a rational or a medical explanation in every case. But I am disappointed to hear that the authorities were going along with that
That
explanation
that
without
guy,
investigating.
that guy is now the police chief.
Oh, no.
Officer Bajan is now the police chief
Ugh.
of Broadsburg, Pennsylvania. It wasn't until recently. You talk about ghosts and are ghosts real? I mean, ghosts are real. People, in terms of people claiming to see ghosts, right? I mean, they're not making it up. The
No.
question is, what are ghosts? And the thing I always like to say is, if ghosts are real, how come they're not naked? Right? How come people see them with clothing? And to me, that suggests that it's some type of psychological phenomena that we're projecting our perceptions.
Mhm.
Plus the images that have been taken of ghosts have changed with the technology available to take the images, right? Yes, they used to be like Mary Todd Lincoln is in a photo with Abe, dead Abe, standing next to just in the top hat, right? And looks just like, and now they're orbs or they're glowing lights. It's like, what the hell happened there?
Yeah, how did the ghosts get less detailed over
Yeah.
time?
Exactly, exactly.
And why do they always have to come out at night and like what are they scared of the sun? I don't understand why ghost hunters have to wait till it's pitch black and go stumbling around in the dark. Aren't the ghosts always there? I don't understand it. Anyway, yeah. So, this initial story you told correlates very well with two things. So I've interviewed Dr. Bartholomew several times before on different subjects that were currently in the news. And I actually also did a book review of your Havana Syndrome book. And so I wrote down a couple of things that you've said to me in person or you've written in the book. I'm not sure what these are. And these both things correlate very well with the story you just told. You said people search for confirmation and affirmation of their pre-existing beliefs. And then the second one was humans have remarkable capacity for self-delusion.
Yep, going down rabbit holes and just with the internet today, people can go into their room, shut their doors, and if you're a white supremacist, you can find groups online and go down that rabbit hole or Bigfoot or whatever it is, and you can hang out with Bigfoot people and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like I always like to say, speak of the devil and he is bound to appear. People see what they want to see and expect to see and hope to see. And what's the old sociological axiom? If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. And I would also suggest that it's true for women as well.
Yeah,
I
and
see
in
what
the
you did there.
corollary to speak of the devil and he will appear is speak of the Holy Spirit and he will be able to influence you, right? Because I have talked to and Carr could probably talk about this themselves because they were an evangelical Christian. I never was, but my family was, and it's like if you talk about the Holy Spirit and they feel this feeling in a service, they believe the Holy Spirit is doing it.
Yes. Yeah, they would say you feel the presence of the Holy Spirit, or it will just come over you, but of course it's, completely intangible to anyone else, very conveniently, I think. Uh, and the experience is, whatever experience you had, it may be completely different from one person to the next. Also quite conveniently, if you ask me.
An interesting aside here is that I've often heard um, the negative consequences of religion and religious beliefs. And there are a lot, and they fuel wars and things like that. But I've often thought as well, like if you look at a place like Papua New Guinea, with hundreds of different languages and cultures and these different tribes and all the conflict they have there. And if you look at religions, the major religions, in a way, yes, they fuel conflict, but in another way, they don't, in the sense that they give large swaths of people similar conduct codes. And in that way, it can be seen as a positive. In other ways, though, it can be seen as a negative.
Okay, so I'd like to get into the conversation about one of the things I talk to you about most frequently, and basically to catch up on what's going on. Because I've kind of zoned out on the topic after dealing with it for quite a long time and interviewing you for several places on it. And I haven't seen it in the news a lot. So specifically, we're talking about Havana Syndrome, which one of our questions, and somebody actually in the poll said, "What is this? I've never heard of it." So that's quite interesting. So for people who are unaware at all, what is Havana Syndrome? What does that mean?
Well, in late 2016, embassy personnel at the U.S. Embassy in Havana and undercover CIA operatives started to get sick after hearing strange sounds. And because it happened in Havana, Cuba, it got called Havana Syndrome. In August of 2017, the government came out and announced that they believed that there was something going on here and there may be some type of an attack on American diplomats, and later Canadian diplomats were affected as well. The symptoms of Havana Syndrome um, are headache, nausea, dizziness, forgetfulness, fatigue, tinnitus, um, difficulty sleeping. And of course, they also included supposedly brain damage, white matter tract changes, hearing loss, things like this. And there's so much misinformation out there. When I first heard about this, I was like, wow, this is terrible. American diplomats in Cuba are being attacked by some foreign agent with a new secret weapon. Um, I have spent 8 years investigating this with neurologist Robert Barlow at the UCLA Medical Center, and the whole thing just falls apart. I mean, Havana Syndrome is clearly a myth, but if you were to watch the media, there's a lot of misinformation out there in the media.
So would would you say that the people that were experiencing this, were they having actual symptoms, but they were just not caused by this sort of outlandish hypothesis about, foreign microwaves and sound waves and things? Was it some other mundane cause, as we alluded to in the poll?
Well, look, people say to me, they say, you don't know what you're talking about. Concussion-like symptoms, hearing loss, brain damage. It can't possibly be mass psychogenic illness, or, it has to be. Um, and so there's something real going on there. And if you look at the first 21 victims in Cuba, after they first started claiming to be attacked, the State Department officials said, well, take your mobile phone, hold it up and record it. 8 of the first 21 victims recorded their attacks. A secret group of scientists in the government analyzed those recordings. They were kept classified until 2021. Their analysis was completed by 2018. It was that those recordings were the mating call of the Indies short-tailed cricket. Yet the government officials kept coming out during this time when they knew this, saying that they believe that there's a real attack going on. And so the senators and the Congress people who had access to that report would have known that. And they would have also known that the FBI report, which has never been released, but has been leaked in terms of conclusions. In 2018, the FBI concluded it was mass psychogenic illness. Both those reports, one of them is still kept confidential. The other one has been released. And so, on the one hand, government officials were saying, oh, we think we're being attacked. And I think they're trying to whip up people behind them and get them to support them, when in fact, they knew this information and didn't release it to the public. And to me, that's dishonest.
So let's put this in context of the political situation when it was, right? This was early in the Trump administration, and he had an axe to grind against Cuba, as did the senator who was involved with running the committee, correct?
That's right. And so when you look at this case, you have to go back to patient zero, the first person who was affected. And this was this guy who was walking outside of this posh neighborhood in Havana in late 2016. He heard these strange sounds, and he speculated with other undercover CIA operatives that, this is kind of weird. And then he had an ear infection, basically went to the embassy clinic and said that, I actually think I'm being attacked. And when they had the Christmas party / New Year party for embassy personnel, which included the diplomats and the undercover officers, he went around with his mobile phone playing the recording when he had these symptoms, and he believed that it was some type of an attack. And he was suggesting to the other personnel that, since you've been to Cuba, have you had something like this similar happen to you? Do you have any health issues? It may be because you've been attacked as well. And so Havana Syndrome was born.
And
Ah.
one of the things I've heard against this as well, the claim was Americans are being attacked, and then Canadians started to feel symptoms. And I think they said, well, there's no way the Canadians could have known about this, but that's just not true, right?
That's not true, because the Canadians and the Americans shared information. So they knew. And then it spread around the world through, I would argue, mass suggestion, because it started to spread around the world in 2017, 2018. And there were some diplomats in China who claimed to have health issues after hearing strange sounds. And then the US State Department issued a directive to all their embassy staff around the world. If you hear strange sounds and feel unwell, and there's the whole laundry list of symptoms, right? From fatigue to forgetfulness to insomnia to tinnitus, that you should report this. And then in 2021, I believe it was September, the US military issued a directive to over 3 million personnel around the world that if you hear strange sounds and feel unwell, or feel unwell and hear strange sounds, that you should report these incidents. And that goes back for several years, right? And you can potentially get compensation for it as well. And so then suddenly there were over 1,500 reports around the world of US embassy personnel or military personnel claiming that they had Havana Syndrome. And it's ridiculous in the sense that fatigue, nausea, tinnitus, these are symptoms that many people have in any given week of their life. And the other interesting thing here is there was a study done at my university, Auckland University, headed by Keith Petrie, the head of health psychology, a number of years ago, where they interviewed people and they asked them, in the past week, how many of these symptoms have you had? And they had a whole list: headache, nausea, dizziness, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, all these different symptoms. The average person had 5 in any given week. These are very common symptoms that generally most people have in any given week of their lives a lot of these symptoms. And, because I've done so many interviews, I got the list here, the whole list: headache, nausea, dizziness, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, disorientation, forgetfulness, confusion, tinnitus, insomnia, balance problems, head pressure, difficulty seeing, ear pain, depression, brain damage, and hearing loss. And of course, the studies suggesting brain damage and hearing loss, that wasn't true. It just wasn't true in the studies. They were very vague studies. They were poorly done. But the media reports about them before the studies came out were suggesting that that's what they had concluded. And for months, you'd hear that. Then the study comes out, and it's very anticlimactic. And then it just kind of gets buried in page 7, doesn't it?
Yeah, that is always what happens. And by the way, I wanted to mention that this, yeah, I want to catch up with you. Like, where is this at now? Because last time I talked to you was over a year ago. But this survived the Trump administration because Biden signed into law the Havana Act of 2021, and Havana in this case stands for Helping American Victims Afflicted by Neurological Attacks. So that became the name of the law, saying yes, they were absolutely neurological attacks by ray guns.
That's right. And they asked Bill Burns, the former CIA director, after those laws were passed, why is it that the CIA and the FBI have now concluded that Havana syndrome is most likely not from a foreign entity, but is psychological in origin? And he was at a NATO conference, and he said, "Well, we convinced people." People in the government convinced some of our employees that this was real. So I guess it's only fair they're getting compensation. There was a long history in science of governments paying compensation for imaginary conditions. Telegraphists' cramp around the turn of the 1920s and
So
30s.
sorry, say that again. So this is to do with the
Telegraphists'
telegraph or the
cramp
telegraph?
uh, with the telegraph, with pressing the whatever it is they press there
Dot 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 dash
lever
dash
down
dash. That
over
one.
and over again.
Mhm.
Um, there's repetition strain in Australia, which was nicknamed kangaroo paw because it was almost always just in Australia, and people with the same computers doing the same thing in other countries and the same company were not having the same symptoms, right? So there's a long history of this. And I see Havana syndrome as a type of moral panic, right? Over the fear of new technology. There's always been a fear of new technologies. For example, when the telephone first came out, there was a fear that the crackling sounds on the phone that people were hearing was making them sick and actually giving them concussion-like symptoms, which is the same claim with Havana syndrome. When AM radio first came out in the early 1920s and 30s, there was a fear that the invisible waves traveling through the air were making people sick and affecting the weather. When artificial refrigeration came out, when ice cubes, people were claiming that ice cubes were making them sick because they were artificially created. And now, more recently, you've got the fear of mobile phones, Wi-Fi, and 5G making people unwell. When they've done studies where they'll put somebody in a room and they'll expose them to Wi-Fi and ask them to write down symptoms, and they invariably write down a whole bunch of symptoms. Then they will shut the Wi-Fi off and they will ask them to continue to write down any symptoms they have, and they typically write down fewer. When in fact, the room they were in was shielded from Wi-Fi and there was no Wi-Fi exposure at all. It was a sham study. And so it's the power of expectation and the power of belief to affect people's well-being and in feelings, right? Their feeling of wellness.
Wow, that's really interesting because I didn't realize, that these were the symptoms, especially about like the Havana syndrome. When people described it, they made it sound so serious, like they were having these, lingering neurological issues, which, I, I guess technically that does describe some of the symptoms that you mentioned, but it sounds, so much more serious and, concussion symptoms. That sounds so, I don't know, quantifiable and, difficult to refute. But then when you list out those symptoms, things like, fatigue or dizziness or insomnia, I mean, yeah, those are those
I
symptoms that you look up on WebMD, and, the list of conditions that you might have is, endless.
So tell us
and
about the more serious of those, again, because my
look,
understanding from what I read in your book, Havana Syndrome, was that the studies done by the NSA, et cetera, were just, just flawed.
yeah, the JAMA studies, you think of JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, it's got legitimacy, it's got credibility. The two JAMA studies, when they came out, they were seriously flawed. And more recently, like in the past month or two, they interviewed there was 2018 study and the 2019 study. They interviewed the lead author of the 2019 study, and she was like, "Oh, well, I don't know why people were getting so excited about this because we did say they were preliminary, yeah, but you weren't making that point in the media. And the implication was there was concussion-like symptoms. And I have to say, Robert Barlow and myself, were criticized to no end in 2017, 2018, 2019 by government officials, by some other scientists as well that we didn't know what we were talking about. And then lo and behold, in March of 2023, the intelligence community comes out and they reach the conclusion what we had concluded years earlier, which is Havana Syndrome is almost certainly a myth. It's not created by some foreign entity, that it is a combination of factors. One of them is that it's mass psychogenic illness. But people often say to me, oh, it can't be all. I've never claimed it's all mass psychogenic illness or even the majority of mass psychogenic illness. What the government concluded as we had was that some cases are mass psychogenic illness, but a large number are simply people waking up in the morning and feeling an array of different symptoms, maybe because they didn't drink enough water the night before, but they've been put on alert to be aware of all these different symptoms. And these are symptoms that just about every human being has in every week of their life, right? And that's part of the problem with the vagueness of this. So it is the real issue with Havana Syndrome was those two JAMA studies coming out and they were taken seriously in the media. And, I worked in CNN radio when it first came out, and it irked me to no end to hear CNN TV keep reporting, as did NBC and CBS, that the diplomats in Havana had experienced brain damage. They did not experience brain damage when you look at those studies. It was not clear. And when you look, they had brain anomalies, but they were minor brain anomalies, and there's the same type of minor brain anomalies you would expect to find in any small cohort of people who are under extreme stress. And were they under extreme stress? Sure. They were in a foreign country. They were told they're going to be surveilled 24/7 because that's what they do in Cuba. Even when you're in your house, they're watching you alone, sleeping at night. And then they were told, oh, by the way, we suspect that you may be the subject of a new sonic weapon that can cause injury to you or your children who you've brought over here. Don't stand or sleep near windows. It's like, well, by any definition, that's stress.
Oh, so in some cases, perhaps even just the anxiety about what might be happening, you're saying could have produced the symptoms that were being reported. I think anxiety was one of those symptoms, actually.
Absolutely. That's exactly what happened. And if you were to take the young Puritan girls in Salem, Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1691 to 1693 who were exhibiting those strange symptoms, which were psychogenic in origin clearly, and you were to run them through an MRI, they would have minor brain anomalies as well. And here's the other thing. People claim, well, my symptoms have gradually gotten better over time since I've been treated, even though they don't really know what they're treating them for. Well, yeah, because that's what happens with mass psychogenic illness. The reduction of stress over time reduces the symptoms. But there's two types of mass psychogenic illness. The short-term type, where there's no pre-existing anxiety, rapid onset, rapid recovery, usually a few hours. Then you've got the kind that's like what happened in Salem, that's more common in countries in Africa and Asia, where you have typically neurological symptoms because the nerves and neurons that send messages to the brain get garbled and you get twitching, shaking, altered states of consciousness. And that's what you're getting with Havana Syndrome. And it doesn't go away overnight, even if you take medication to relax. It takes usually months for those types of symptoms to subside. And that's exactly what happened.
So can you bring me up to date on this? The last thing I recall was a CBS report where they were still talking like this, definitely a thing that there were Soviet agents in this country that they've somehow traced and all that. So what's been going on? Have the claims slowed down or not, or what's going on?
Well, there's still a lot of claims out there, but the official position of the United States government, despite Donald Trump being in there and the intelligence community, remains that Havana Syndrome is almost certainly not a foreign power doing this, that there's an array of mundane explanations for it. Recently, the Canadian government, who's had a number of their diplomats asking for compensation, and there's a court case involved there, the Canadian government has issued a report in which they have concluded that, as the Americans have, there's most likely mundane causes and not a foreign government involved. Now, it wouldn't surprise me with the Republicans pushing things nowadays that are not based on the weight of evidence, that this could flare up in the future, particularly if Trump wants to, get the Epstein files off the front pages. But there's just so many things going on right now that Trump hasn't gone to that playbook. And look, because if they are briefing him, they're telling him that on the weight of evidence, it appears that there is no foreign government involvement here. And look, he also is supposedly a friend of Vladimir Putin's, and Russia is supposedly the #1 candidate for causing Havana Syndrome. That may be another motivation why he hasn't pushed this any further. And my whole thing has always been, if the Russians have this new secret weapon, how come they're bombing Ukraine? And how come you haven't used this weapon on Vladimir Zelensky, who you absolutely hate and don't want to see in power? And by the way, there was a NATO conference in which one of the American delegation people claimed to have been stricken with Havana Syndrome. Vladimir Zelensky was at that conference. How come they didn't zap him? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, all good questions. And instead, they're getting some lower level agent walking down the stairs of the White House.
Right. And these symptoms that people are experiencing, like the one that felt dizzy near the White House and spatial disorientation, and in patient zero as well, I believe that they are suffering vestibular issues, which deal with spatial awareness in the inner ear and balance. And these are very common. A third of people will have a vestibular issue in their lifetime. Very common conditions. And patient zero, the first person affected, sounds very much like a vestibular issue. I've never said that he's suffering from mass psychogenic illness. Having said that, he was recently interviewed on the BBC, the first person affected, and they asked him, "What do you think about Robert Bartholomew?" And he referred to me as I believe it was a dickhead nobody who's a part-time professor at a university in New Zealand. Um, and yeah, okay, I guess being a former CIA agent, he hasn't taken the time to look at my credentials, in which I'd like to think I'm one of the leading authorities on mass psychogenic illness and social panics and social delusions. Um, but apparently he hasn't.
Well, this goes back to what, we said before. People search for confirmation and affirmation of their beliefs, and someone who's speaking the opposite is just a dickhead.
And look, I'm very sympathetic to him. I think he's suffering from real symptoms. And I think it's really unfortunate, but I think they're most likely vestibular in nature. And he needs to see a good neurologist. And, not every condition science fully understands, but I'm going with the non-ray gun explanation.
We actually have someone who is here today. I won't use his name, who I know actually had an attack of something that his brain went fuzzy and his family had to take him to the hospital. They spent a long time doing tests and they never found out what it was. And this happens to people. Things happen to people, right? And if this had happened, then he was somebody who was in Cuba or in the government, perhaps, could have definitely said, yep, I was attacked by this weapon.
Yeah, and there's something called functional neurological disorder, which is another term for multiple unexplained symptoms, mass psychogenic illness, mass sociogenic illness. Functional neurological disorder refers to an array of conditions in the nervous system that think of it as an overstimulation of the nervous system, a software problem, where you get glitches and then it goes away. And you may not be able to actually understand what happened in the first place. But yeah.
Yeah, so this, it's clear that this is a mixture of the nocebo effect and also misattribution of things and other reasons, but not people making stuff up. And my understanding is when this all started, people were saying, well, it can't be mass psychogenic illness because people wouldn't be making this up.
That's right. It's like Bigfoot, UFOs. Most people are honest, sincere people, and they're not making it up, right? But they see a light in the sky, and it becomes an extraterrestrial spaceship, or they have
Misattribution, yeah.
yeah, that's right. Or they have some type of inner experience and they think they've been abducted by aliens. But I think most people are not hoaxers. Most people are not making it up. Or you misidentify some a squirrel 7 feet up on a tree, and you shine a flashlight over there in the night, and you see these two shining eyes, and your mind fills in the rest, and you just saw Bigfoot, and you turn and you run. But most people are ordinary people reporting extraordinary experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is perhaps the most recent version of people claiming that there are attacks, which likely are not. And you want to talk about some of the other ones through history? I mean, I have a list here. Mad Gasser, Halifax Slasher, Spring Hill Jack, London Monster, Monkey Man of Delhi. It goes on and on and on. And recently we talked about the Iranian schoolgirl gas attacks.
Yep. So let me try to frame this so you understand what's going on. And let me do it with lake monsters, okay? The Lake Champlain monster, the Loch Ness monster. The leading candidate for these creatures are that it's either a plesiosaur or a zoigolodon, a form of primitive whale. These creatures went extinct millions of years ago, or are believed to have been extinct millions of years ago. But the issue is they were mammals. They were air breathers. They would have to come up periodically for air. And for there to be a breeding community in these lakes, the experts agree it'd have to have between 35 and 50. But it doesn't make any sense because you should have a lot more sightings with these creatures coming up for air, unless there's times when there's ice in the lakes, right? But what you get in reality is a day, a week, a month goes by, and you get nothing at all, no reports. Months and months go by, you get no reports. Then there'll be a dramatic report, and you get a flurry of sightings that follow over the course of days or weeks, and it whittles down to nothing. And then months go by again, and you've got nothing. And then all of a sudden, there'll be another dramatic report, and there will be and the media or social media, a whole bunch of other reports follow. And then slowly they wane down to nothing again, and it happens over and over again. This is not a reflection of the existence of a prehistoric creature in the lake. It is a reflection of media coverage of prehistoric creatures in the lake and the belief about that, so that when people see this dramatic report, they then start to intensely scrutinize the lake more than they ordinarily would. They're more expectant, they're looking longer, and they're more likely under those circumstances to redefine ambiguous stimuli such as a log, a piece of driftwood, a wake from a boat, as the Loch Ness Monster or the Lake Champlain Monster. And that is because, and this comes back to this whole point we're talking about, the human brain has this hard wiring to connect dots and seek out patterns and find meaning, even when there is no clear meaning or pattern. The face on Mars, the image of Jesus on a corn chip, the Virgin Mary on a grilled cheese sandwich. And that grilled cheese sandwich sold to a casino in the Western United States for over 20,000 US dollars. Another good example is it's part of the human condition, clouds. Even as we get older, we do this. We look up into the sky and it's like, oh, there's a horse. That's a horse's head. There's a kitten or a puppy, right? We see things in clouds because we are conditioned to look for patterns and look for meaning. And so you get this with other phenomena as well. In the mad gasser of Mattoon, Illinois, in the mid-1940s, just before the end of the war, there was a lot of talk at the time that the United States the Germans might use poison gas on us, and the United States might use it back. And it might be a scorched earth policy by the Nazis as they were losing the war. There was a lot of concern over that. And at that time in Mattoon, Illinois, the woman who was the first victim had just been paid. And she was counting her money in the front window that evening with some relatives. And there was a report in the news of an escaped Nazi in the area. And all these things, and there had been a lot of break-ins recently in that area. And it was a confluence of factors. And then she went and she laid down in her bed and she smelled this odd smell and felt temporary paralysis, which could have been sleep paralysis. It later turned out that smell was probably a gardenia flower bed, which was right next to her window. But the police came and the assumption was she'd been attacked. And then when her husband came back from his job as a taxi driver later that night in the early morning, he thought he saw a shadowy figure in the distance near the house. Well, the newspaper reported that there was a mad gasser on the loose and this woman had actually been sprayed. But just imagine, you think you've been attacked by some poison gas. What do? You don't do anything. You don't go to the hospital. You don't seek doctor's attention. You just like, okay, I'm feeling better now, and you don't do anything. That doesn't make any sense. Like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, the older I get, the better I was, right? As people talk about these later, it gets exaggerated and hyped. But if you really thought you'd been attacked and sprayed with poison gas, you'd have gone to see a doctor. But she didn't. So it couldn't have been too dramatic. And then other people in her family started to have symptoms, and it just spread throughout Mattoon. People, and there's always strange smells going on in the environment. You know, it was an industrial town. But people start to become more aware of that, more aware of the smells around them, and hyper vigilant in their environment, right? And reacting to these things. And then the media picks it up and it becomes this gasser who's on the loose. And now anything that's unusual, strange sounds, become part of the gasser's repertoire.
So to bring this closer to the current time frame, a gassing thing happened more recently, right? I wrote you when I started hearing about this, and then you dug into it, and we actually did an interview on the subject of the Iranian schoolgirls gassing, right?
That's
Went
right.
from people without, well, that was all in the news all over the world just a couple of years ago. So can you tell people about what happened with that, and what's happened again? I haven't heard anything about that in a long time.
There's no objective evidence that anyone was gassed. That's even with Western scientists looking at the medical records, and some of them have, of the girls who were temporarily hospitalized. So to hear a report that these girls were gassed, which started in pretty much October, November, a couple of years ago, it sounds like they've been gassed.
And it was
Um,
supposedly like all over the country, like many
yeah, but
schools,
then
right? Not
all of a
just
sudden, within a short period of time, over 120 schools were involved, with thousands and thousands of young schoolgirls who had supposedly been gassed. No one had been arrested. Um, no agent was found. Their symptoms, rapid onset and recovery. And what appears to have happened here is there was a case in a college outside of Tehran where they'd had those protests, right, with young girls protesting along with other people about the hijab, wearing the headscarf. And
yeah, the
so
woman was killed in custody, I believe, and
that's
they
right.
kicked off the
And
protests. Yes.
so there was a case at a college where people reported symptoms of um, food poisoning, and there were clear food poisoning symptoms. And the first victims, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Um, then a rumor started that maybe they were actually poisoned because they were supporting the hijab protests. Then the symptoms changed over the first 24 hours to difficulty breathing, headache, dizziness. And these are more psychogenic anxiety based. That got reported in a news report that maybe they had been poisoned, and it spread around Iran. And within a short period of time, girls in over 120 schools, thousands of them reported feeling unwell. Um, and what I think has happened here, the Iranian government did come out and they concluded that it was psychogenic. I was even on Iranian television. They were interviewing me, and people were saying, "Oh, you're supporting this evil regime." Look, I'm just trying to be objective and doing an objective analysis on this. And my evidence supports the conclusions of the Iranian government. I mean, why would the Iranian government want to poison young schoolgirls and get the population that's already upset over the hijab issue further upset? I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. But I think what happens is when this gets reported in the media, and it's so typical of social panic cases, now they're hyper vigilant about their environment. They're keenly aware of everything going on around them, and they're more likely to be aware of smells from hawker stalls and foods being cooked and industrial pollution. They're more aware of those smells and more likely to redefine them as some type of chemical attack and then exhibit the symptoms. And it just feeds on itself. The more reports, oh, that it must be true. But it gets to a point where, like UFOs, oh, there's thousands of reports. Oh, there's thousands of alien spacecraft all over. No, I mean, there's so many reports.
I actually saw an airline pilot say on CNN or ABC, "Yes, there's millions of UFOs reported by pilots every day." He said that.
The former airline pilot, what was his name? Um, I mean, there are UFOs. People see objects in the sky they can't identify. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an extraterrestrial spacecraft, right?
Ooh, let's talk about drones. So this is another thing that's even closer than the Iranian schoolgirl thing in time, right? Just last year, 9 months ago, I interviewed you and two other skeptics discussing the Christmas drone invasion. I live in New Jersey, and this was the center point of the world of the drone panic. So what was that all about?
Well, what is it Shakespeare said in A Midsummer Night's Dream? Or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush, supposed a bear. And for me, that sums up the whole issue with the drones. I mean, there are drones, they're real, so it gives it plausibility. And however, that it's the Iranians or some other foreign entity doing this. I mean, there's no evidence for that whatsoever. And it also comes back to that old skeptic saying, right? When you hear the sound of hoofbeats in the night, first think horses, not zebras. And yeah, there could be the Iranians flying drones around, or the Chinese, or the Russians, or the government's doing this as well. But to what end? What's the whole purpose of this? And then after it started, I think people were deliberately flying drones to see if they could get on the news
And people
because
want clicks on social media. There was one that went kind of viral around here. I don't remember if it was Instagram or TikTok, but it was a woman that lives probably an hour drive from me at the shore, pointing her camera up at in the dark at night. And there's a line of lights coming up over her head at the Jersey Shore. Look at them! There's the drones. That's proof. And this went viral, and all the comments were, "Ah, there it is. They're covering this up." That's the landing pattern for one of the largest airports in the world, Newark International Airport.
Rob, clicks for social media, no one would ever do that.
No, surely not. Well, and that kind of makes me think about, another sort of angle on this. In addition to these sort of phenomena that people are wondering about, what about the concept of moral panics, where people are almost getting worried about some kind of spooky boogeyman that seems to invariably get associated with some marginalized group of people who take the brunt of the panic? Like I'm thinking of, the satanic panic of the 1980s and 90s around the time of that Rain Man situation you described. How does that fit into this framework?
It all drives it, doesn't it? And there's so many factors involved. And I we can come back to moral panics, but I do want to mention something that I think is crucial to talking about religion, and that is I think that in many ways, the rise of belief in UFOs and space aliens is a substitute for God in a secular age where fewer people and religion is in decline in general. Um, People view things like the possibility of space aliens as plausible. Science says they could exist. And as a result, that's why earlier in the podcast you mentioned something about there wasn't more interest in Bigfoot than UFOs. I think there's more interest in UFOs and Bigfoot because UFOs have the potential to give people transcendence, right? And if you look at the science fiction reports, stories about aliens, they're often said to live thousands of years or be immortal through their technology. If the aliens were to visit Earth and share their technology, perhaps they could elevate us to the immortal realm of the gods, right? And so things like UFOs and Bigfoot, I see as anti-scientific symbols in a secular age. Farmer Joe down the road here, who I grew up with, saw Bigfoot. Well, science says Bigfoot doesn't exist. Throughout the entire history of the world, there's no fossils, body, bones, or DNA evidence. But I know Farmer Jones, and I believe him. The scientists have got it wrong. And if the scientists got Bigfoot wrong, maybe they got religion wrong as well. And so it undermines science.
Yeah, there's a lot of hostility to the people who are deep into the UFO culture. The people who believe the government is hiding the fact that they're in collusion with aliens. You know, there's many races they deal with, they have treaties with them, whatever, because of what you said, by the way. And I saw this in person at a Fringe meeting. It's a local club. They call themselves the state name and Fringe. And there was somebody got up there and by testimony was crying in front of the group of like 50, 60 people because he's talking about how evil the government is for not telling us the truth because they want to hide the truth about aliens. They don't want, the word is disclosure. But and a person in his life died from cancer unnecessarily because they could give us the treatment for all of these things, but then the government would have to admit there are aliens.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot of people out there, and you'll see them dragged out now and then on the UFO issue, right? It's like, well, such and such was a colonel in the military, and he's announced that there was some kind of cover-up going on. I don't think the military knows anything more than anybody else, right? In all these civilian UFO groups. But there's always going to be people in the military, where there's like 3 million people in the US military or something like that, right? There's always going to be people in there that believe in everything from Bigfoot to UFOs, and they're going to make different claims, right? And just because they're in the military doesn't give them, just like a police officer claims to see a UFO. Well, I don't give them any more credibility than anybody else. People say, oh, but they're trained observers. No, they're not. You know, eyewitness perception is very fallible and subject to error. The human mind does not take in information like a video cassette recorder. It interprets information as it takes it in. And to all you have to do is ask the hundreds of people who have been executed. Oh, I guess we can't because they're dead now. But all the people that were convicted on eyewitness testimony and were sent to the death chamber, when later they were exonerated through DNA evidence. And, you know, what's the study that they did with Bugs Bunny at Disneyland, Elizabeth Loftus did years ago, where she asked people how many of them had taken a picture when they went to Disneyland with Bugs Bunny. And a number of them talked about getting their picture taken with Bugs Bunny, but Bugs Bunny is a Warner Brothers trademark and is not part of Disneyland. So false memories, taking it back now to what was mentioned earlier with Kara about the satanic ritual abuse panic, which started in the early 1980s and went into the mid 90s in the United States and in other Western countries. You know, it was
This
based
this
on,
just destroyed people's lives. I remember the McMartin preschool trial is the name that comes to mind.
that's right, in 1982, Ray Bucky and other people at that facility were accused of child molestation. Everyone got off but Ray, and then it was one of the largest civil trials in U.S. history. I remember hearing about that when it happened, and I thought to myself, over 300 kids claimed to be molested by this guy. I've never heard of a case where anyone could be more guilty. And as the trial went on, the evidence came out, it was based basically on one kid who had diaper rash or something, and they assumed he'd been molested. And then the police had this meeting where they asked people in the community to come forward if you had kids at that facility and to give suspicious, talk to their kids and any incidents that may have suggested child abuse. And Ray Bucky got exonerated in the end because when they looked at the interviews, they were so leading. Oh, did Ray Bucky touch you inappropriately? No. Well, your friend Mary said that he did, and Johnny said that he did, and Joey said that he did. You're telling me he didn't touch you the next thing you know, the kid's saying he touched him inappropriately. And look, they've done studies. They'll put a camera in a room, in a school room of young children, and a guy will come into the room and touch a child on the hand and say, "Hi, how are you today?" And go around and just say different things and leave. Then a few days later, they ask the children, "Did he touch you inappropriately?" And they ask leading questions, and not that leading, to the point where everyone is saying that, yes, he touched me inappropriately, he touched me here, he shouldn't have done that. But they've got it on camera, the whole thing on camera, where he didn't do that. And that's the issue, isn't it? That human beings are prone to um, seeing things that aren't there and believing things that aren't real, and actually redefining reality that they had experienced into something that was different than what initially had happened.
So I got to interview Elizabeth Loftus just a couple of months ago. I'm going to put the link in the chat to my interview with her, and we talked about all this. And I was so disturbed by all the details about how fragile human memory is. And I already kind of knew that, but her telling details about the experiments they run to do things like you're talking about, where they can convince people of things that never happened. Um, and kind of a funny story there. And the reason I thought of interviewing her, and I told her during the interview this had happened, I was called for jury duty about a year ago. And during the voir dire process, we found out that the testimony it was a criminal trial, and the conviction would be based upon the eyewitness testimony of a single individual of something that happened 8 years ago. And I demanded to go see. This wasn't one of the questions at all. Do you have a problem with that? It's the typical thing. Do you know any police officers? Do you know any attorneys? But I said, I have another issue I want to talk to the judge about. And I went to her chambers and I told her, I know Elizabeth Loftus, and I did a short interview of her once for the Skeptic Zone. We talked all about how memory is fragile and dot, 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 dot. And she goes, what are you talking about? And it was like they didn't in the legal system even realize that this was going to be an issue. And I don't know what happened in that trial because I was dismissed. That person could have been convicted based upon one person's testimony. It's bizarre to me.
It really is a concern. And just like social panics, these things appear real, right? I mean, there was a case. I was studying for my PhD at James Cook University in North Queensland, Australia, a number of years ago. And I would go in on the weekends and do work in the computer lab. And one Friday night, this graduate student named Eve said to me, she goes, Robert, she goes, you're a fantastic dancer. I said, what? She goes, yeah, I saw you last night at some club in the city in Townsville, and you were amazing. And I said, no, it wasn't me. She goes, no, it was you. Don't be shy. And I said, no, it wasn't. Then I thought to myself, instead of dancing, what if somebody had shot somebody or stabbed somebody and run off? They'd be looking for me because they would be swearing up and down that it was me who was involved. And to take this into religion, when you look at something like the Gospels, right? It's believed that they were written decades after the event, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, people claim to have things today where they claim to see Bigfoot or have some type of an encounter, um, and they get that wrong, you know, right now. What would happen and how distorted would something potentially happen over the course of 20, 30, 40, 50 years after this has been told and retold over again with such a vested interest that, your salvation is at play here as well. And, it's like religion. It's not just that ghosts are real or the paranormal is real. It's proof of life after death. So there is a vested interest. People want to believe. I want to believe, right? Because
Oh, yeah, yeah. Mediums. We've had several discussions about mediumship on RfRx talks by people who, investigate that these people are frauds. And yet people want to believe that. And it's very hard to change their minds once they've been put into contact with their dead children. Now you're going to, and they believe that they've already talked to them and they've got all this from, and now to try to convince them that, no, that was fake. Now it's like losing your child again, and they just will not change their minds on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then the studies on like children with stuffed animals, right? Most children with stuffed animals realize they're stuffed animals, right? But imaginary companions. People talk about imaginary companions. It's quite common for children to have imaginary companions. It's almost like a part of us. Well, if religion is not real, do we not have imaginary companions in adulthood, right?
Yeah, there's a meme that goes around like that where some mother is chastising a young daughter for having an imaginary friend, and then she goes and prays. Yeah.
Sure. And so is that part of a continuation of something that we um, have in childhood? I don't know.
Ooh, so I'd like you to tell a story that has something to do with the kind of the fact that we don't really attribute the correct things to alternative medicines and things like that. Tell people about Benjamin Franklin's harmonica. That's a fascinating story to me.
Yeah, in the mid 1700s, Benjamin Franklin, who you'd all know from the $100 note, who's all our friend, he, well, before this time, people would go around and have concerts in America and in Europe. Um, and these concerts, um, it would be the American colonies. Um, People would have glasses of water and they would wet their finger and they would play those glasses of water with different amounts of water in there, which makes different sounds. They play it like a musical instrument. He got the idea of taking glass spools and spinning them with a foot pump and then wetting your fingers and placing them on the glass as it's spinning. And it makes a sound almost like a 1950s grade B flying saucer movie with like, woo, woo, something like that. Makes this high pitched, eerie sound. And so when he developed this instrument, and they made a whole bunch of them, they made hundreds and hundreds, and people would do concerts in the mid 1700s with the glass harmonica. And rumors started that if you went to one of these concerts and listened to people playing the harmonica, that it could actually cure certain medical conditions. And people were reporting going to concerts and being cured. Then a couple of very prominent harmonica players fell sick. And counter rumor started that actually listening to the glass harmonica, and it's spelled with an A, not an H, the glass harmonica could actually make people sick. And soon after, a number of people reported going to these concerts and feeling unwell as a result of listening to the harmonica. So, in the course of a few decades, Benjamin Franklin's glass harmonica had shifted from a nocebo, well, shifted from a placebo, which is you think it's going to make you feel better and it does, to a nocebo, where you think you've exposed to something that's going to make you feel unwell and you do. Um, and to me, it underscores the power of the mind, the power of belief, the power of expectation, and the power of framing to affect how we feel.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting story because people clearly, buy over-the-counter things which have no validity, and there's fine print that says, these claims have not been validated by the Food and Drug Administration and whatever, and yet they think it helps them, and I think that's largely like the harmonica was in the beginning.
Yeah, and to make a parallel with my book, which is Phantom Attackers and Social Panics, a study of imaginary assailants. To me, what fascinated me about doing that book was that there are all these cases out there. The Halifax slasher in England in 1938, the Mad Gasser Mattoon, the Phantom Slasher of Taipei in the early 50s, where entire communities are paralyzed for days and weeks with someone going around attacking people. The police bring in reinforcements. Businesses crawl to a halt, especially at night. Vigilante groups roam the streets. People are afraid to go out. Yet, in the end, it turned out there never was a slasher. There never was a gasser. And to me, that's fascinating how so many people can come to believe something that never was. And that comes to parallel with religion as well.
And it's very culturally dependent too, right? Because I've told the story of the monkey man in India to, marry. How could anybody believe that? But in that culture at the time, it was perfectly acceptable that there was this hybrid weird monkey going around on roller skates or something with a helmet and slashing people.
Because it was based on a religious belief as well that there was a monkey-like creature, half human, half monkey. By the way, it could not have been monkeys that were involved in those cases. They're almost always at night with people sleeping out on their rooftops because there had been a heat wave. And in the darkness, and somebody starts screaming, they thought they saw something. People were bumping into stuff. I think 3 people died. They fell off. 2 people fell off buildings. One pregnant woman tragically fell down a staircase and died. And but when you look, there was an emergency room physician who studied over 50 cases, and he found that the trauma, there were no monkey marks, scratches or anything. It was people running into stuff and falling down. And the people who've studied monkeys in that region for decades came out and said, we've studied these local monkeys. They don't go out at night. I've studied them for over 30 years. They've never attacked anybody in my team, my research team. And it was that belief, the power of a belief.
And also spread by media and television, because this was all over the news as if it was a real thing.
Absolutely. And now, in the past, it might be limited to a certain, just small area. But now with the media and social media, not so much social media at the time, but it was texting and stuff. And in the media, there were dramatic headlines about the monkey man. And it was huge. Or maybe we should say monkey person in this day and age. But it was a huge event that paralyzed parts of New Delhi, India, for a couple of weeks, and would have caused a lot of economic downturn and just mass anxiety for the people living there at the time.
Oh, I bring this to a specific religious miracle claim? Do you know anything about the miracle of the sun, and would that be connected at all with this kind of a thing?
Well, you got Fatima, you got Lourdes, right? There
Yeah,
was
I'm talking
one.
about I think it's the one at Fatima where the sun supposedly was seen by huge numbers of people standing still or in the sky or something like that.
So they've done a similar one in Puerto Rico in the 1950s, I believe it was. It was written up in a sociology journal where somebody predicted there was going to be an appearance of the Virgin Mary. Something very similar happened there. But they had sociologists going out into the audience and interviewing people as it was going on. And it was a lot of, some people claimed to be healed, some people didn't. And a lot of this phenomena, like if you look at Lourdes and you look at Fatima, you see there'll be piles of wheelchairs. There'll be piles of crutches where people have gone there and they have a problem walking. And they've supposedly been healed. But the old saying is, when you go to Lourdes and Fatima, you see piles of wheelchairs and piles of crutches, but you don't see any wooden legs. And so I was at a university in South Australia where one of the students had a back problem, and she was telling me she had not been able to touch her toes in years. And we had a faith healer come to the university. And she mentioned that, and she went up and he held the Bible up and he touched her back and he said, touch your toes. And she did. She touched her toes. And that was quite remarkable. Um, 10 days later, she could not touch her toes again. Um, and I think it's some type of, adrenaline flowing through you and um, just something going on there. But it wasn't permanent. That's my point. And yeah, I mean, there is a phenomena going on, but it wasn't a lasting one. Same with, I suppose, with, other people. If faith healing really worked, then people wouldn't die, right? I mean, you
Yeah,
know,
well, faith healers certainly shouldn't be in tents somewhere. They should be in hospitals.
yeah, well,
Interesting how that never seems to work out on things that couldn't otherwise be resolved on their own or through existing treatment methods. But okay, well, we have gone over a lot of fascinating topics here, and I know we have some questions about some more topics that people would love to hear your thoughts on, Dr. Bartholomew. Before we go to the questions, though, is there anything else that you would like to mention about any of these social delusions, moral panics, mass psychogenic illness, or anything like that?
I'm a sympathetic skeptic. I once believed in just about everything that you just mentioned. Um, and, I try to keep an open mind, and I'm very sympathetic, but I need to see evidence. People often ask me, do you believe? Do you believe in Havana Syndrome? Do you believe in UFOs? It's not a question of belief, it's a question of evidence. And what evidence is there? And you have to try to objectively look at that. But it's hard to objectively look at evidence for religion, for example, when if you believe it, then you're going to have everlasting life or something. And you're going to be high-fiving your family when you die, and you're all going to be reunited together and heaven. Um, Yeah. Although I have to tell you the story. The other day, a student of mine supposedly uploaded their assignment, and they said, "Oh, it didn't upload for some reason." I said, "Okay, um, well, I believe you. Um, just upload it again." And they said, "But what if I die before I upload it?" I said, "Well, then you can just upload it from hell." I s-
Oh.
Okay,
Amazing.
anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Love it. All right. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing your insights on all of those topics. And there were so many. I was looking through our show outline, and Rob had collected together so many examples, and we only got through a small percentage of them. Seems to be, such a wide-ranging issue. Um, and so we do have some questions, and our questions actually have a little bit more to do, I think, with people wondering about sometimes the idea of this concept of the mass psychogenic illness or mass psychosis being used inappropriately to describe real phenomena. And so one of the questions that we have is some people claim that rising numbers of trans youth are evidence of mass psychosis. How can we demonstrate that that is not true and that the overall percentage of people identifying as transgender remains relatively stable across generations? And that what we're seeing in youth is more visibility and acceptance, not a sudden epidemic. And I guess what are your thoughts on how that concept might be applied here, perhaps inappropriately?
Well, first of all, the term mass psychosis, I would argue, is an inappropriate term because I'm not aware of mass psychosis. There's folie à deux, psychosis of association, but I don't think mass psychosis per se exists.
Mm,
Like sudden mass uh, illness, mental illness, and stuff like that. Um, when it comes to trans, LGBTQ, I would like to see people refer to it just as sexually diverse. I mean, it'd be a lot
mhm,
easier than remembering all those letters, but um, there, I don't know what the baseline is, okay?
mhm,
Um, as to whether there has been a trend or not. It wouldn't be mass psychogenic illness, right?
mhm,
It would be a social trend toward this. Um, maybe, to shock your parents or your friends are doing it or something like this. But that's a possibility, but I don't know what the baseline is. What's the baseline historically of people who are trans, and what has it trended toward? Um, and with there has been more social acceptance of this, and then more people come out. Is that a reflection of that social acceptance? Is it also a reflection of people who want to be different, like, having orange hair or something, that you want to just shock your parents and shock your friends and um, be or be rebellious? Um, I would say that I don't know. And I think it's important to say you don't know on topics where you don't know. It's not my area of expertise.
Mhm.
So I would just say, is it a fad? Is it something like that? I don't know. I don't know enough about the trend to be able to make that and the topic to be able to talk about it in a in an effective manner.
Okay, let me ask
Yeah.
you about something that we said in the introduction, and I've never actually heard you talk about. The part that you wrote about the history of demonizing immigrants. Like, yeah, so like, what book was that, and how did that come up, and what's that about?
Well, that's this book here, um, which was published by Prometheus. Now I think they're Roman and Littlefield. Um,
American Intolerance is the title.
that's right. American Intolerance, Our Dark History of Demonizing Immigrants. And so I look at the Jewish scare. I start with Native Americans because they were the first immigrants to the New World. And then I look at the Chinese scare in the late 1800s. There was the Japanese scare around that time as well, which came back again during the early 1940s. There was the German scare in the United States during World War I, which reflected the fear that German Americans and sympathizers with the Kaiser were going to have an uprising, and there was all kinds of discrimination. And I mean, there was an attempt to, um, well, high schools and universities stopped teaching German. Um, German music was banned in some areas. Some towns and cities with German names were renamed. Um, even different foods uh, were renamed as well. Um, and so there was this hysteria, this moral panic over everything German, and that they were infiltrating the government and infiltrating different towns and communities, the governments there. And there was kind of like, um, some of the modern day communist scares that we've had, very similar there. Then you go into the 1930s and 40s. There was the Jewish scare that Jews are controlling everything, and um, that yeah, there's just been scare after scare after scare of involving migrants, and it turns out when you look at the crime statistics, clearly migrants have lower rates of crime than just about any other group. However, there are ways around that. You can label somebody who's here illegally. Well, that's a crime in itself. Therefore, all of a sudden, the rate of criminality just skyrockets, doesn't it? I mean, it's all on, there's lies, there are damn lies, and then there's statistics and how you want to view something.
Yeah, that's certainly been reported in the right-wing media for years and years now, that immigrants cause most of the crime, and all the statistics I've ever seen counter that. And it's logical, because especially if you're someone who's not documented, you're not going to stick your neck out if you can help it, and get caught by the police. And where a citizen doesn't have that same fear.
That's right. And migrants tend to because they're often on the low end of the social economic scale, tend to be very hardworking, right? Very hard work ethic. I don't want to stereotype all of them that way, but I mean, a lot of them, and they'll do jobs that regular Americans don't want to do, like work out in the hot sun picking all kinds of fruits and vegetables, where other people don't want to do those jobs.
Yeah. So the other thing that was in your introduction that I had not heard before, that you lived with the indigenous people of Malaysia and then also Australia. What was that about?
Yeah, I lived in Malaysia for several years, lived on the island of Borneo for part of that time, and was part of the Malay culture there. And then in Central Australia, I lived with Aborigines in Central Australia and a community called Ali Kurung, which was just unbelievable. After leaving the community, we found that 25% of the people in the community, males, had restraining orders that had been issued against them. There's only a few hundred people, but it was very, very dangerous. Um, just very violent, a lot of alcohol abuse, um, just a lot of abuse in general, to the point where I was teaching there, I stopped teaching. I stopped teaching normal subjects. And I taught that, it's not right for someone to be able to beat you up. And just, yeah, I can remember one day there was this girl was screaming outside of the school fence. And the fence was barbed wired and very high up. And I couldn't get around to get to her, and she was being beaten by two other Aboriginal girls. I called the police, and through some miracle, they came, because the police aren't normally in that community. Like, they're only there a few hours a week. And they came, and this girl was being kicked, punched, dragged by her hair along the ground, and really viciously. And so the police broke it up. And then I was lectured by the principal and community elder to never do that again. That if I were to see that, you leave it alone, because that girl had done something to them, and she was like out of that social group. And the only way she could be friends with her again was to be beaten up. And to which I thought to myself, well, if it happens again, I'll call the police again. But that was true. That was
Oh.
then there was another, the local police officer there. Her name was Gwen Brown. She was an Aboriginal police officer. I was talking to her one day, and she goes, "Oh," she put her head down like this. She goes, "I think I'd see Derek over there. Can you tell me when he's passed by? He's my cousin. I can't look at him." I'm like, "Okay." And then I had students who couldn't look at other students because they were related, and they were cousins, and you're not supposed to look at them or talk to them. So how do they know they're not supposed? Well, they point them out initially. And it's like, okay, you can't talk to that person. If you see them, you look away.
Huh.
Probably having something to do with an incest taboo, I'm guessing. However, you can marry your cousin and it's not incest, and it's quite common around the world. And you may have a slightly higher rate of genetic anomaly, but it's no greater than a 37-year-old woman having a baby. And that's why something like 18% of the world's population are first and second cousins. I'm not sure how we got onto that, but yeah.
I actually had a friend whose family was from a small town in Italy, and he said, yeah, they did they legally had one if two people got engaged, one of them had to change their last name, so it wasn't the same name marrying the same name, but they were actually first cousins or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, if you do that over and over and over again over many generations, I think you get greater genetic anomaly. But yeah, it's quite common for people to marry their first cousin, even second cousin. Very common, second cousin. High,
Hmm.
it's well over 10%. I
And it's
did.
probably more problematic with humans than a lot of other species, because one of the things I've learned recently is that humans are less genetically diverse than almost any other mammal, which is quite astounding. Apparently, we went through a bottleneck where there was somewhere between 5 and 10,000 humans alive at one point. Yeah, and so that was
Well,
like close to extinction.
for me, the most important lesson I teach my students is that race is a myth, but
Hmm.
it's a social reality, in that people find this hard to believe, but we are 99.9% genetically identical. You know, if you had a book, every few pages you'd have a different um, letter on those pages, which makes us different. But the thing that makes us the most different, I think, is our facial features, right? But if you just looked at your hands or your feet, we'd look very similar. It'd be hard to distinguish people. But that's the most important message out there for me, is that race is a myth. You look at dogs, there's about 40 different species of dogs, about 40 different species of cats, right? They cannot reproduce among themselves, but all humans can potentially reproduce if you are able to, um, whether you're in Mongolia or you are in Aborigine in Australia, because we have not been around long enough to develop other species. We've only been around 350 to 400,000 years, and it takes longer to develop other species. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we talk about here a lot as well, about, race as a social reality rather than a biological one. And a lot of people do find that surprising, but well, that's just science. So, on that note, I think this might be a good time to head to the Hangout. We do have some more questions that we weren't able to get to yet. If you're able to stick around with us, we'd love to keep chatting with you for a little bit longer, but totally your call. I will. All right, great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Bartholomew, for sharing your insights with us and talking about all of these different topics. We have so many more that we want to ask you about. And thank you, everybody, for coming, and for all of the volunteers who make this happen every week. So thanks, everybody. And join us next week, same time, same channel. We'll talk a little bit more about some of what we did at the excursion, and maybe even have some of our speakers maybe from the excursion as well. Also upcoming, we have some exciting guests coming up in the next few weeks. Benjamin Radford, our very own Daniel Sokoloff, Kenny Biddle, as we mentioned earlier. Also, I hear Susan Gerbic got back on the schedule again, which I cannot wait. Saw her recently in person. And don't forget also to follow us on social media. It helps other people find us, and it helps you keep up with what we're doing. We are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and of course, YouTube. And other than that, Rob, how else can people get involved?
Yes, they can join us as volunteers. We've learned that healing can come from helping others do that, and our volunteers find meaning and purpose by helping us here help other people. All of our services are provided by volunteers, and we're always in need of more people. And there's all sorts of jobs besides working the helplines or the chat lines. We need people to find, vet, and post good resources for our clients to use, to host the support groups, to moderate the online community, and even if you have any IT skills, we need people to update our software. We're constantly trying to improve things for a better experience for both of our clients and the agents to help the clients. So to apply, go to our main page. There's a volunteer tab, and which is at recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer. And lastly, let me say we have a 3-minute video that's at the bottom of our main page, and you can search it on YouTube just by typing in RFR what we do, and it takes about 3 minutes to tell you everything this organization does, and you can send that to anyone in your family or friends who you think may be helped by our services.
Awesome, thanks. And this is the point where we usually hand it over to Dr. Ray or Gail Jordan, our ED, to wrap us up for the evening. But they are still traveling back home from our fall excursion. So we'll wait to hear from them until they get back next week. And I say we just head over to the Hangout and we can talk with